Welcome back to another 0 Point Reviews, everybody. This time around, you just got Jeff, co-host Kevin. We're covering a movie that he felt he could not handle, and it made him so sick he had to check himself into the hospital. So unfortunately, you got Jeff covering The Crow, City of Angels. Yep, that's right. We're doing Crow City of Angels today, starring Vincent Perez, and a pretty good cast. And since it's going to be a solo video, I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet and to the point, and hopefully not too much meandering. But this is still 0 Point Reviews. I don't give a damn whether there's a point to this movie or not. I'm reviewing this bitch. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm going the good, the bad, and the ugly on this particular movie. And just to go ahead and let's get started on the good. What is good about this movie? Yes, we got Vincent Perez. He has a good look. I'm not exactly a fan of the face paint. For the most part, he's got a very good presence. I don't know about some of the dialogue he had at times. I'll get to the bad in a moment because the dialogue and the writing ain't great. But as far as the good goes, I thought he was a decent choice. Overall, the casting I thought was a lot of fun. A lot of their performances were all over the place. That could be, we'll get to that in a moment too. But for the most part, you had Vincent Perez, you had Richard Brooks, you had Thomas Paine, you had Iggy Pop, baby. Yep, you got Iggy Pop in this bad boy. And as Kevin would ask for me to show this, yep, Grandma Pop. And he was pretty much one of the main henchmen guys in this particular one. And he did all right. He went by the name of Curve in this one. He was pretty much on cocaine half the time. Don't know if that was really Iggy Pop, but his character certainly was. But it was a lot of fun watching Iggy Pop. I love Richard Brooks. He plays the main overall boss, as opposed to like Top Dollar from the first one. Top Dollar. But Richard Brooks is known largely from, I know he's in like some of the Law and Order shows, but he's also known from, as far as I'm concerned, Brimstone with by Ethan Reeves Vorse that starred John Glover as the devil. He played Hadrible in one of the episodes. He was one of the big bads. He's also been in a TV show called Good versus Evil. He has been in quite a few things. So I'm a big fan of him, and most of the cast was really done. Thomas Jane played a guy, basically just a throwaway villain who ended up getting tossed into he got tossed around a peep shop or a peep theater, peep show place, an adult theater where you could put in the coins and watch the girls strip and you could have your fun. Ask Pee Wee Herman about that one. But he had a fun little death scene. He wasn't really in the movie very much, and if you blink, you basically miss it. He's about the second person that dies in this movie, so it's unfortunate that a lot of the cast didn't get much for their roles. They couldn't really sink their teeth into it, but overall, on paper, the cast for this movie is pretty tight, and I think that's one of the good things about this movie is this is a very good cast. I think where they fall apart is going to be like their overall characters, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Otherwise, I think the movie does look good. The visuals are outstanding. The visual effects at times are great. The shots, the framing, overall, the movie looks good. It has the epic note of the city, of a dark, depressed city. It's got some good goth vibes going on. And of course, we can go back to Vincent here and show like him on the still that I got. They got the coat right. They got a lot, and they got some great iconic shots like I was just talking about, like when we get to final thoughts, like the framing. Like this is really good. I really enjoy this. It gives you something more than just what we got in the first movie, and I find that to be pretty intriguing. Also, I do dig the score in this one by Graham Revel. He does a very good job with keeping the haunted surrealness from the first one. They do borrow tracks from the first one, but he did a great job doing the score. The soundtrack by itself is fine. I don't feel it fits as well as it did in the first one, largely because of how that all came together as like this iconic soundtrack of all time. But the music is enjoyable. The placement, the choices kind of are suspect, but overall, this sounds good too. And I really enjoy that the fact that they kept the atmosphere with Graham Revell's score going on. Without that, I don't know if I would have liked the music as much. So we got good visuals, we got good sound going on. It'll be buyer's choice on whether you like the actual soundtrack or not. I mean, they even had the Deftones play themselves in this movie. It's actually in the credits listed as that. That's actually kind of fun. But, you know, largely the cat is well cast. It's well shot, looks great. Visual effects are really good most of the time. And when we get to some of the CGI in the ultimate fight between Judah and Ash, it doesn't look so great, but it could have been way worse considering 90s CGI that was going on. All right, let's just go ahead. Let's hit the bad, baby. It's not good. So when we are talking about the bad here, we are basically talking about the movie as a whole. Unfortunately, the story is not great. The core story is fine. You're talking about Ash and his poor child who were brutally murdered for witnessing a murder. And he dies. He then comes back as the Crow, of course. And then we got Sarah coming from the original recast, of course, because they're trying to age her up. So this is supposed to be years later, but an actual direct connection to the first Crow. That's where I think you made an initial mistake with this movie, is narratively, you shouldn't try and link to the original Crow because you're already pulling on people's feelings about the first one and a certain expectation that, hey, we just had Brandon Lee in an amazing movie directed by Alex Proyas. There was the tragedy, but ultimately the movie did very well. It didn't do like gangbusters or anything like that. But when you are automatically referencing the original movie, people are going to have an expectation, like Alien to Aliens. You expect there's going to be some sort of similar quality and some sort of continuity. I have a problem with a lot of the continuity basically in the script. The continuity falls apart all the time. How they wrote Sarah's character is incredibly fucking stupid. I ain't gonna sugarcoat it because it's stupid. They made her this emo tattoo artist. I'm not complaining that she was a tattoo artist, but they made her look like she was borderline trying to off herself half the movie, and she ultimately sacrifices herself at the end of the movie. I don't have a problem with the arc. I have a problem with how they got there. And also a lot of the characters I feel like just got utterly destroyed in this movie. There are times when Ash himself, he comes up from when he is resurrected as the Crow. He comes up and like halfway through the movie, he's like, oh, what happens when I complete my mission? And Sarah tells him, well, then you go back. You go back to the afterlife. And he just looks over at her and he says, maybe I don't want to. You haven't finished your mission. Your kid is waiting there for you, but you're falling in fucking love? Like, what are you doing in this movie? That felt completely out of place with the Crow as a character. And I'm only judging this based off the movie because I'm a fan of the original movie. However, there's some issues with that. I got issues just overall. Like, his Ash as a character just goes all over the place. He goes from raging psycho to very focused to I'm in love. I need to save the woman I love. Forget my kid. Oh, wait, maybe I do want to get to my kid and save my kid. Oh, wait, no, I'm still in love. I want to save her first, or I got to deal with whatever she's dealing with first. And just, it feels like they took a bit of the mystique out of his character because at times he feels like a newer Crow, but at other times he feels like somebody who's just playing Crow. I ultimately have a problem with Vincent's performance. It doesn't really feel like he understood the character. A lot of this is going to come down to me from the writing. Thank you, David Gore, for writing this. You are proven you need a filter. I feel David David Goyer's writing in this is very indicative of his style in general when he doesn't have a writing partner or anybody else to help him, or if he's just putting finishing touches on a script. He's got to have writing partners. He's got to have a writing filter, or we get movies like this or Blade Trinity. And yes, Blade Trinity was his sole directing and sole writing. So let's keep that in mind when we're thinking about this movie. It's not exactly, there's elements there of a good story, but it falls apart like real quick. Part of that's going to come from the editing. However, on the other side, as far as like the bad goes, there's just one more thing I want to talk about, and that is basically the movie is an editing disaster. And that's going to then bring us to one other thing on the bad side is I feel the running time did not help this. 86 minutes, it feels like it doesn't feel right. It feels like a complete disaster and a mess. And that's going to come from the editing. And the editing, what ended up happening is during post, the Weinsteins, yep, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. The Weinsteins pulled the editing from the director, Mr. Poole, Tim Pope, not Tim Poole. Sorry about that, everybody. I'm not editing this. But they took the editing away from Tim Pope, and he didn't get final say over the cut. They actually rearranged a bunch of the scenes, made scenes like flashbacks. They basically really tinkered with the movie. They wanted it to feel a lot closer to the first one. They basically wanted the carbon copy of the first one. And ultimately, that's never good. That's bad. So Tim didn't even get to put out the final product that he wanted. And it's taken him left such a bad taste in his mouth. It's taken literally like 20 years for him to come around to even talk about this movie. Like, he absolutely hates his experience on this movie. When you have a main director and you had it taken away from them in like the editing bay like that, that's never good. Sometimes it's for good reason. Most of the time it's because the producers wanted something completely different and they weren't happy with their final choice and what they were doing going forward. All right, everybody, let's get ugly. So the ugliness of this movie is they shouldn't have made this fucking movie. Ultimately, trying to like basically do a facelift carbon copy Xerox of the original Crow, ultimately by the Weinsteins in the editing bay, that was a very bad idea. They should have tried for a completely different story. There was a different story here, but it needed tweaking. It needed like a few more drafts. It needed some real good help. So it's hard to say like what the pacing could have been like for this movie. With better pacing, better editing in general, there could have been a much better movie here. Now, this thing doesn't get the best ratings on like any of like the sites. If I remember right, it's kind of around like a 4 to a 6 on most places. So unfortunately, it doesn't turn out all that great. And unfortunately, like, I wanted to like this movie. I haven't seen this movie since I saw it in theaters like years ago. So it's really hard for me to be like, okay, let's watch this with fresh eyes, open, and keep an open eye, open heart, open mind. And I think it would have turned out better. Open mind, mind freak, Chris Angel. That's my man, Kevin, with the great slides like usual. But ultimately, the Weinstein's involvement does not help this movie. What they ended up doing on production, post-production ultimately hurt, and it definitely puts a stain on the movie that was already there. They had a tough act to follow with the first one, and this only came out a couple years after the first one. They maybe should have waited longer, but my argument would be they shouldn't have fucking done it to begin with. Overall, the movie is an ugly disaster. There are good moments. There's cool death scenes. I mean, these are like honorable mentions. Like there is something to this movie at times, but it always then follows it up with something fucking stupid. Whether it's, hey, let's have Ash acting like a fucking, and then like 5 minutes later, oh, I love this person. Oh, and we're talking about this kid named Grace that Ash is connected with that kind of reminds him of his son, who that storyline goes fucking nowhere. And ultimately, in the end, they kill Sarah just so she could unite with them and his Ash and his kid in the afterlife. I understand the happy ending. That was fucking stupid. They had no chemistry between Ash and Sarah, like at all. There was none of that there. So ultimately, there's just so many issues. And overall, it's an ugly mess of a film. But there is moments to enjoy, like a great cast. Iggy does a pretty good job with performing. And, that's just the way it went with this movie. It's totally unfortunate. But final thoughts, everybody. Basically, this is kind of a very ho-hum sequel. The next few sequels are even worse. They're completely pointless and irrelevant. This movie tried to have a point, but it got tinkered with and messed with so much that it became unidentifiable. It felt like The Crow, but ultimately, final thought, they tried too hard to recapture the lightning of the first one. That's on the Weinsteins and David Goyer's writing. They were all trying to recapture that bottle of lightning, and I think that was a mistake. Should have allowed the franchise to breathe for a minute. Ultimately, we would then get the TV show, which we are covering on our podcast. So if you're very much interested in checking out The Crow Stairway to Heaven starring Mark Dacascos, we are covering that on our podcast. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We apologize that this is a bit of a different video for 0 Point Reviews, but if you do like this style, we can work in the future on doing shorter videos, doing some different graphics, different transitions. Do you like the good, bad, the ugly style that I just did? Because I got a kick out of it. I know it's kind of a first time for me trying that on here, but I did get a kick out of doing this. So I really greatly appreciate everybody tuning in. Want to say thank you. Please hit that like button down below. Comment. You got any thoughts about this movie? You hate this movie? You love this movie? Did I misunderstand something? Or did I misstate something? I want to hear about it. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that little bell notification. We'll see you all on the next one. Make sure you check us out on all of our social media platforms. We got Facebook, Twitter. We are at Suns and Shadows. We're also on Instagram at Suns and Shadows Cast. We are at SunsAndShadows.com. Thank you again, everybody, and we'll see you down the road.